Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is The Rant. I'm your host, Charles Lamson. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours. All right. Today is Saturday, 29th day of February, the year of our Lord, 2020. Today's topic is going to be part 3, a little mashup of what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to have a little mashup with. I'm going to start things off with a mashup of Karl Marx meets contemporary management practices. Karl Marx meets contemporary capitalist management practices, right? Okay, so, and it's a little thing I like to call The Rant, Managing for Competitive Advantage, a Marxist perspective, part 3. First half of the big show, I'm going to have a seance. I'm going to call forth, I'm going to summon the spirit of Karl Marx. He's going to join us, and he's going to talk about his Das Kapital. That's right, one of the most influential, infamous works on economics of all times, Das Kapital. It's a critical analysis of capitalism. And so then we're going to do that the first half. Second half, I'm going to close that first half with the banishing ritual. And then in the second half, we're going to talk about contemporary tips and strategies for management tips and strategies, contemporary management tips and strategies for competitive advantage. And so we're all going to tie all that together into this little mashup I'm creating for y'all. So, without further ado, Karl, are you there? I summon your spirit forth from the depths of economist hell. Please talk to us, Karl. I was just joking. I didn't mean. I meant no disrespect.
In certain cases, such as in the production of value, have to be considered under this aspect alone. There is nothing mysterious in this, but in the expression of value, there is a complete turn of the tables. For instance, how is the fact to be expressed that weaving creates the value of the linen not by virtue of being weaving as such, but by reason of its general property of being human labour? Simply by opposing to weaving that other particular form of concrete labour, in this instance tailoring, which produces the equivalent of the product of weaving. Just as the coat in its bodily form became a direct expression of value, so now does tailoring, a concrete form of labour, appear as the direct and palpable embodiment of human labour generally. Hence, the second peculiarity of the equivalent form is that concrete labour becomes the form under which its opposite, abstract human labour, manifests itself. But because this concrete labour, tailoring in our case, ranks as and is directly identified with undifferentiated human labour, it also ranks as identical with any other sort of labour, and therefore with that embodied in the linen. Consequently, although like all other commodity-producing labour, it is the labour of private individuals, yet at the same time it ranks as labour directly social in its character. This is the reason why it results in a product directly exchangeable with other commodities. We have then a third peculiarity of the equivalent form, namely that the labour of private individuals takes the form of its opposite, labour directly social in its form. The two latter peculiarities of the equivalent form will become more intelligible if we go back to the great thinker, who was the first to analyse so many forms, whether of thought, society, or nature, and amongst them also the form of value. I mean Aristotle. In the first place, he clearly enunciates that the money form of commodities is only the further development of the simple form of value, i.e. of the expression of the value of one commodity in some other commodity, taken at random. For he says, 5 beds equals 1 house is not to be distinguished from 5 beds equals so much money. He further sees that the value relation which gives rise to this expression makes it necessary that the house should qualitatively be made the equal of the bed, and that, without such an equalization, these two clearly different things could not be compared with each other as commensurable quantities. Exchange, he says, cannot take place without equality, and equality not without commensurability. Here, however, he comes to a stop and gives up the further analysis of the form of value. Quote, "It is, however, in reality impossible that such unlike things can be commensurable," end quote, i.e. qualitatively equal. Such an equalization can only be something foreign to their real nature, consequently only, quote, "a makeshift for practical purposes," end quote. Aristotle, therefore, himself tells us what barred the way to his further analysis. It was the absence of any concept of value. What is that equal something, that common substance, which admits of the value of the beds being expressed by a house? Such a thing in truth cannot exist, says Aristotle. And why not? Compared with the beds, the house does represent something equal to them, insofar as it represents what is really equal, both in the beds and the house, and that is human labour. There was, however, an important fact which prevented Aristotle from seeing that to attribute value to commodities is merely a mode of expressing all labour as equal human labour, and consequently as labour of equal quality. Greek society was founded upon slavery, and had therefore for its natural basis the inequality of men and their labour powers. The secret of the expression of value, namely, that all kinds of labour are equal and equivalent, because and so far as they are human labour in general, cannot be deciphered until the notion of human equality has already acquired the fixity of a popular prejudice. This, however, is possible only in a society in which the great mass of the produce of labour takes the form of commodities, in which, consequently, the dominant relation between man and man is that of owners of commodities. The brilliancy of Aristotle's genius is shown by this alone, that he discovered in the expression of the value of commodities a relation of equality. The peculiar conditions of the society in which he lived alone prevented him from discovering what, in truth, was at the bottom of this equality. 4. The elementary form of value considered as a whole. The elementary form of value of a commodity is contained in the equation expressing its value relation to another commodity of a different kind, or in its exchange relation to the same. The value of commodity A is qualitatively expressed by the fact that commodity B is directly exchangeable with it. Its value is quantitatively expressed by the fact that a definite quantity of B is exchangeable with a definite quantity of A. In other words, the value of a commodity obtains independent and definite expression by taking the form of exchange value. When, at the beginning of this chapter, we said in common parlance that a commodity is both a use value and an exchange value, we were, accurately speaking, wrong. A commodity is a use value or object of utility and a value. It manifests itself as this twofold thing that it is, as soon as its value assumes an independent form, viz. The form of exchange value. It never assumes this form when isolated, but only when placed in a value or exchange relation with another commodity of a different kind. When once we know this, such a mode of expression does no harm, it simply serves as an abbreviation. Our analysis has shown that the form or expression of the value of a commodity originates in the nature of value, and not that value and its magnitude originate in the mode of their expression as exchange value. This, however, is the delusion as well of the mercantilists and their recent revivers, Ferrier, Ganil, and others, as also of their antipodes, the modern bagmen of free trade, such as Bastiat. Footnote: F.L.A. Ferrier, sous-inspecteur des douanes du gouvernement considéré dans ses rapports avec le commerce, Paris 1805, and Charles Ganil, Des systèmes d'économie politique, 2nd edition, Paris 1821, end footnote. The mercantilists lay special stress on the qualitative aspect of the expression of value, and consequently on the equivalent form of commodities, which attains its full perfection in money. The modern hawkers of free trade, who must get rid of their article at any price, on the other hand, lay most stress on the quantitative aspect of the relative form of value. For them, there consequently exists neither value nor magnitude of value, anywhere except in its expression by means of the exchange relation of commodities, that is, in the daily list of prices current. MacLeod, who has taken upon himself to dress up the confused ideas of Lombard Street in the most learned finery, is a successful cross between the superstitious mercantilists and the enlightened free trade bagmen. A close scrutiny of the expression of the value of A in terms of B, contained in the equation expressing the value relation of A to B, has shown us that, within that relation, the bodily form of A figures only as a use value, the bodily form of B only as the form or aspect of value. The opposition or contrast existing internally in each commodity between use value and value is therefore made evident externally by two commodities being placed in such relation to each other that the commodity whose value it is sought to express figures directly as a mere use value, while the commodity in which that value is to be expressed figures directly as a mere exchange value. Hence, the elementary form of value of a commodity is the elementary form in which the contrast contained in that commodity between use value and value becomes apparent. Every product of labour is, in all states of society, a use value, but it is only at a definite historical epoch in a society's development that such a product becomes a commodity, viz., at the epoch when the labour spent on the production of a useful article becomes expressed as one of the objective qualities of that article, i.e., as its value. It therefore follows that the elementary value form is also the primitive form under which a product of labour appears historically as a commodity, and that the gradual transformation of such products into commodities proceeds pari passu with the development of the value form. We perceive at first sight the deficiencies of the elementary form of value. It is a mere germ, which must undergo a series of metamorphoses before it can ripen into the price form. The expression of the value commodity A in terms of any other commodity B merely distinguishes the value from the use value of A, and therefore places A merely in a relation of exchange with a single different commodity, B. But it is still far from expressing A's qualitative equality and quantitative proportionality to all commodities. To the elementary relative value form of a commodity, there corresponds the single equivalent form of one other commodity. Thus, in the relative expression of value of the linen, the coat assumes the form of equivalence, or of being directly exchangeable, only in relation to a single commodity, the linen. Nevertheless, the elementary form of value passes, by an easy transition, into a more complete form. It is true that by means of the elementary form, the value of a commodity A becomes expressed in terms of one and only one other commodity, but that one may be a commodity of any kind, coat, iron, corn, or anything else. Therefore, according as A is placed in relation with one or the other, we get from one and the same commodity different elementary expressions of value. Footnote. In Homer, for instance, the value of an article is expressed in a series of different things. End footnote. The number of such possible expressions is limited only by the number of different kinds of commodities distinct from it. The isolated expression of A's value is therefore convertible into a series, prolonged to any length, of the different elementary expressions of that value. End of Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 1. Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 2 of Kapital, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Karl Manchester, 2007. Kapital, Volume 1 by Karl Marx. Chapter 1, Section 3. B. Total or expanded form of value. Z of commodity A equals U of commodity B, or V of commodity C, or equals W of commodity D, or equals commodity E, or equals, etc. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or equals 10 pounds of tea, or equals 40 pounds of coffee, or equals 1 quarter of corn, or equals 2 ounces of gold, or equals half a ton of iron, or equals, etc. 1. The expanded relative form of value. The value of a single commodity, the linen, for example, is now expressed in terms of numberless other elements of the world of commodities. Every other commodity now becomes a mirror of the linen's value. Footnote. For this reason, we can speak of the coat value of the linen when its value is expressed in coats, or of its corn value when expressed in corn, and so on. Every such expression tells us that what appears in the use of values, cost, corn, etc., is the value of the linen. Quote, the value of any commodity denoting its relation in exchange, we may speak of it as corn value, cloth value, according to the commodity with which it is compared, and hence there are 1,000 different kinds of value, as many kinds of value as there are commodities in existence, and all are equally real and equally nominal. End quote. A critical dissertation on the nature, measures, and causes of value, chiefly in reference to the writings of Mr. Ricardo and his followers, by the author of Essays on the Formation, etc. of Opinions, London, 1825. S. Bailey, the author of this anonymous work, a work which in its day created much stir in England, fancied that, by thus pointing out the various relative expressions of one and the same value, he had proved the impossibility of any determination of the concept of value. However narrow his own views may have been, yet that he laid his finger on some serious defects in the Ricardian theory is proved by the animosity with which he was attacked by Ricardo's followers. See the Westminster Review, for example. End footnote. It is thus that for the first time this value shows itself in its true light as a congelation of undifferentiated human labour. For the labour that creates it now stands expressly revealed as labour that ranks equally with every other sort of human labour, no matter what its form, whether tailoring, ploughing, mining, etc., and no matter, therefore, whether it is realised in coats, corn, iron, or gold. The linen, by virtue of the form of its value, now stands in a social relation, no longer with only one kind of commodity, but with the whole world of commodities. As a commodity, it is a citizen of that world. At the same time, the interminable series of value equations implies that as regards the value of a commodity, it is a matter of indifference under what particular form or kind of use value it appears. In the first form, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, it might, for aught that otherwise appears, be pure accident that these two commodities are exchangeable in definite quantities. In the second form, on the contrary, we perceive at once the background that determines and is essentially different from this accidental appearance. The value of the linen remains unaltered in magnitude, whether expressed in coats, coffee, or iron, or in the numberless different commodities, the property of as many different owners. The accidental relation between two individual commodity owners disappears. It becomes plain that it is not the exchange of commodities which regulates the magnitude of their value, but, on the contrary, that it is the magnitude of their value which controls their exchange proportions. 2. The particular equivalent form. Each commodity, such as coat, tea, corn, iron, etc., figures in the expression of value of the linen as an equivalent and, consequently, as a thing that is value. The bodily form of each of these commodities figures now as a particular equivalent form, one out of many. In the same way, the manifold concrete useful kinds of labour embodied in these different commodities rank now as so many different forms of the realisation or manifestation of undifferentiated human labour. 3. defects of the total or expanded form of value. In the first place, the relative expression of value is incomplete because the series representing it is interminable. The chain of which each equation of value is a link is liable at any moment to be lengthened by each new kind of commodity that comes into existence and furnishes the material for a fresh expression of value. In the second place, it is a many-coloured mosaic of disparate and independent expressions of value. And lastly, if, as must be the case, the relative value of each commodity in turn becomes expressed in this expanded form, we get for each of them a relative value form, different in every case and consisting of an interminable series of expressions of value. The defects of the expanded relative value form are reflected in the corresponding equivalent form. Since the bodily form of each single commodity is one particular equivalent form amongst numberless others, we have on the whole nothing but fragmentary equivalent forms, each excluding the others. In the same way also, the special, concrete, useful kind of labour embodied in each particular equivalent is presented only as a particular kind of labour, and therefore not as an exhaustive representative of human labour generally. The latter, indeed, gains adequate manifestation in the totality of its manifold, particular, concrete forms. But in that case, its expression in an infinite series is ever incomplete and deficient in unity. The expanded relative form is, however, nothing but the sum of the elementary relative expressions or equations of the first kind, such as 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, 20 yards of linen equals 10 pounds of tea, etc. Each of these implies the corresponding inverted equation: 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen, 10 pounds of tea equals 20 yards of linen, etc. In fact, when a person exchanges his linen for many other commodities and thus expresses its value in a series of other commodities, it necessarily follows that the various owners of the latter exchange them for linen and consequently express the value of their various commodities in one and the same third commodity, the linen. If then we reverse the series, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat or equals 10 pounds of tea, etc., that is to say, if we give expression to the converse relation already implied in the series, we get the general form of value. End of Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 2. Part 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 3 of Kapital. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Karl Manchester, 2007. Kapital by Karl Marx. Part 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 3. C. The general form of value. 1 coat, 10 pounds of tea, 40 pounds of coffee, 1 quarter of corn, 2 ounces of gold, half a ton of iron, X commodity A, etc., equal 10 yards of linen. 1. The altered character of the form of value. All commodities now express their value, 1. In an elementary form, because in a single commodity. 2. With unity, because in one and the same commodity. The form of value is elementary and the same for all, therefore general. The forms A and B were fit only to express the value of a commodity as something distinct from its use value or material form. The first form, A, furnishes such questions as the following: 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen, 10 pounds of tea equals half a ton of iron. The value of the coat is equated to linen and that of tea to iron. But to be equated to linen and again to iron is to be as different as are linen and iron. This form, it is plain, occurs practically only in the first beginning, when the products of labour are converted into commodities by accidental and occasional exchanges. The second form, B, distinguishes in a more adequate manner than the first the value of a commodity from its use value. For the value of the coat is there placed in contrast under all possible shapes with the bodily form of the coat. It is equated to linen, to iron, to tea, in short, to everything else, only not to itself, the coat. On the other hand, any general expression of value common to all is directly excluded, for in the equation of value of each commodity, all other commodities now appear only under the form of equivalence. The expanded form of value comes into actual existence for the first time so soon as a particular product of labour, such as cattle, is no longer exceptionally but habitually exchanged for various other commodities. The third and lastly developed form expresses the values of the whole world of commodities in terms of a single commodity set apart for the purpose, namely the linen, and thus represents to us their values by means of their equality with linen. The value of every commodity is now, by being equated to linen, not only different from its own use value, but from all other use values generally, and is, by that very fact, expressed as that which is common to all commodities. By this form, commodities are, for the first time, effectively brought into relation with one another as values, or made to appear as exchange values. The two earlier forms either express the value of each commodity in terms of a single commodity of a different kind, or in a series of many such commodities. In both cases, it is, so to say, the special business of each single commodity to find an expression for its value, and this it does without the help of the others. These others, with respect to the former, play the passive parts of equivalence. The general form of value, C, results from the joint action of the whole world of commodities, and from that alone. A commodity can acquire a general expression of its value only by all other commodities simultaneously with it, expressing their values in the same equivalent, and every new commodity must follow suit. It thus becomes evident that since the existence of commodities as values is purely social, this social existence can be expressed by the totality of their social relations alone, and consequently that the form of their value must be a socially recognised form. All commodities being equated to linen now appear not only as qualitatively equal as values generally, but also as values whose magnitudes are capable of comparison. By expressing the magnitudes of their value in one and the same material, the linen, those magnitudes are also compared with each other. For instance, 10 pounds of tea equals 20 yards of linen, and 40 pounds of coffee equals 20 yards of linen. Therefore, 10 pounds of tea equals 40 pounds of coffee. In other words, there is contained in 1 pound of coffee only 1/4 as much substance of value, labour, as is contained in 1 pound of tea. The general form of relative value, embracing the whole world of commodities, converts the single commodity that is excluded from the rest and made to play the part of equivalent, here the linen, into the universal equivalent. The bodily form of the linen is now the form assumed in common by the values of all commodities. It therefore becomes directly exchangeable with all and every of them. The substance linen becomes the visible incarnation, the social chrysalis state of every kind of human labour. Weaving, which is the labour of certain private individuals producing a particular article, linen, acquires in consequence a social character, the character of equality with all other kinds of labour. The innumerable equations of which the general form of value is composed equate in turn the labour embodied in the linen to that embodied in every other commodity, and they thus convert weaving into the general form of manifestation of undifferentiated human labour. In this manner, the labour realised in the values of commodities is presented not only under its negative aspect, under which abstraction is made from every concrete form and useful property of actual work, but its own positive nature is made to reveal itself expressly. The general value form is the reduction of all kinds of actual labour to their common character of being human labour generally, of being the expenditure of human labour power. The general value form, which represents all products of labour as mere congealations of undifferentiated human labour, shows by its very structure that it is the social resume of the world of commodities. That form, consequently, makes it indisputably evident that in the world of commodities, the character possessed by all labour of being human labour constitutes its specific social character. 2. The interdependent development of the relative form of value and of the equivalent form. The degree of development of the relative form of value corresponds to that of the equivalent form. But we must bear in mind that the development of the latter is only the expression and result of the development of the former. The primary or isolated relative form of value of one commodity converts some other commodity into an isolated equivalent. The expanded form of relative value, which is the expression of the value of one commodity in terms of all other commodities, endows those other commodities with the character of particular equivalents differing in kind. And lastly, a particular kind of commodity acquires the character of universal equivalent because all other commodities make it the material in which they uniformly express their value. The antagonism between the relative form of value and the equivalent form, the two poles of the value form, is developed concurrently with that form itself. The first form, 20 yards of linen equals one coat, already contains this antagonism, without as yet fixing it. According as we read this equation forwards or backwards, the parts played by the linen and the coat are different. In the one case, the relative value of the linen is expressed in the coat. In the other case, the relative value of the coat is expressed in the linen. In this first form of value, therefore, it is difficult to grasp the polar contrast. Form B shows that only one single commodity at a time can completely expand its relative value, and that it acquires this expanded form only because, and insofar as, all other commodities are, with respect to it, equivalents. Here we cannot reverse the equation, as we can the equation 20 yards of linen equals one coat, without altering its general character and converting it from the expanded form of value into the general form of value. Finally, the form C gives to the world of commodities a general social relative form of value, because, and insofar as, thereby all commodities, with the exception of one, are excluded from the equivalent form. A single commodity, the linen, appears therefore to have acquired the character of direct exchangeability with every other commodity because, and insofar as, this character is denied to every other commodity. Footnote: it is by no means self-evident that this character of direct and universal exchangeability is, so to speak, a polar one, and as intimately connected with its opposite pole, the absence of direct exchangeability, as the positive pole of the magnet is with its negative counterpart. It may therefore be imagined that all commodities can simultaneously have this character impressed upon them, just as it can be imagined that all Catholics can be popes together. It is, of course, highly desirable in the eyes of the petit bourgeois, for whom the production of commodities is the nec plus ultra of human freedom and individual independence, that the inconveniences resulting from this character of commodities not being directly exchangeable should be removed. Proudhon's socialism is a working out of this Philistine utopia, a form of socialism which, as I have elsewhere shown, does not possess even the merit of originality. Long before his time, the task was attempted with much better success by Gray, Bray, and others. But for all that, wisdom of this kind flourishes even now in certain circles under the name of science. Never has any school played more tricks with the word science than that of Proudhon. For wo Begriffe fehlen, da stellt zur rechten Zeit ein Wort sich ein. Where thoughts are absent, words are brought in as convenient replacements. Goethe's Faust. See Proudhon's Philosophy of Poverty. End of footnote. The commodity that figures as universal equivalent is, on the other hand, excluded from the relative value form. If the linen or any other commodity serving as universal equivalent were at the same time to share in the relative form of value, it would have to serve as its own equivalent. We should then have 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen. This tautology expresses neither value nor magnitude of value. In order to express the relative value of the universal equivalent, we must rather reverse the form C. This equivalent has no relative form of value in common with other commodities, but its value is relatively expressed by a never-ending series of other commodities. Thus, the expanded form of value, or form B, now shows itself as the specific form of relative value for the equivalent commodity. 3. Transition from the general form of value to the money form. The universal equivalent form is a form of value in general. It can therefore be assumed by any commodity. On the other hand, if a commodity be found to have assumed the universal equivalent form, form C, it is only because, and insofar as, it has been excluded from the rest of all other commodities as their equivalent, and that by their own act. And from the moment that this exclusion becomes finally restricted to one particular commodity, from that moment only, the general form of relative value of the world of commodities obtains real consistence and general social validity. The particular commodity, with whose bodily form the equivalent form is thus socially identified, now becomes the money commodity, or serves as money. It becomes the special social function of that commodity, and consequently its social monopoly, to play within the world of commodities the part of the universal equivalent. Amongst the commodities which, in Form B, figure as particular equivalents of the linen and, in Form C, express in common their relative values in linen, this foremost place has been attained by one in particular, namely gold. If then, in Form C, we replace the linen by gold, we get D, the money form. 20 yards of linen, 1 coat, 10 pounds of tea, 40 pounds of coffee, 1 quarter of corn, 2 ounces of gold, half a ton of iron, X of commodity A equals 2 ounces of gold. In passing from Form A to Form B, and from the latter to Form C, the changes are fundamental. On the other hand, there is no difference between Forms C and D, except that, in the latter, gold has assumed the equivalent form in the place of linen. Gold is in Form D what linen was in Form C, the universal equivalent. The progress consists in this alone, that the character of direct and universal exchangeability, in other words, that the universal equivalent form, has now, by social custom, become finally identified with the substance gold. Gold is now money with reference to all other commodities, only because it was previously, with reference to them, a simple commodity. Like all other commodities, it was also capable of serving as an equivalent, either as a simple equivalent in isolated exchanges, or as a particular equivalent by the side of others. Gradually, it became to serve within varying limits as universal equivalent. So soon as it monopolizes this position in the expression of value for the world of commodities, it becomes the money commodity, and then, and not till then, does Form D become distinct from Form C, and the general form of value becomes changed into the money form. The elementary expression of the relative value of a single commodity, such as linen, in terms of the commodity such as gold that plays the part of money, is the price form of that commodity. The price form of linen is therefore 20 yards of linen equals 2 ounces of gold, or if 2 ounces of gold when coined are £2, 20 yards of linen equals £2. The difficulty in forming a concept of the money form consists in clearly comprehending the universal equivalent form, and as a necessary corollary, the general form of value, Form C. The latter is deducible from Form B, the expanded form of value, the essential component element of which we saw is Form A, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or X of commodity A equals Y of commodity B. The simple commodity form is therefore the germ of the money form. End of Part 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, Part 3. Chapter 1, Section 4 of Kapital, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Kapital, Volume 1, by Karl Marx. Chapter 1, Section 4. The Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret thereof. A commodity appears, at first sight, a very trivial thing, and easily understood. Its analysis shows that it is, in reality, a very queer thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So far as it is of value in use, there is nothing mysterious about it, whether we consider it from the point of view that by its properties it is capable of satisfying human wants, or from the point that those properties are the product of human labour. It is as clear as noonday that man, by his industry, changes the forms of the materials furnished by nature in such a way as to make them useful to him. The form of wood, for instance, is altered by making a table out of it. Yet, for all that, the table continues to be that common everyday thing, wood. But so soon as it steps forth as a commodity, it is changed into something transcendent. It not only stands with its feet on the ground, but in relation to all other commodities, it stands on its head and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas, far more wonderful than table turning ever was. Footnote. In the German edition, there is the following footnote here. Quote, one may recall that China and the tables began to dance when the rest of the world appeared to be standing still. Pour encourager les autres. End quote. The defeat of the 1848-49 revolutions was followed by a period of dismal political reaction in Europe. At that time, spiritualism, especially table turning, became the rage among the European aristocracy. In 1850-64, China was swept by an anti-feudal liberation movement in the form of a large-scale peasant war, the Taiping Revolt. End footnote. The mystical character does not originate, therefore, in their use value. Just as little does it proceed from the nature of the determining factors of value, for in the first place, however varied the useful kinds of labour or productive activities may be, it is a physiological fact that there are functions of the human organism and that each such function, whatever may be its nature or form, is essentially the expenditure of human brain, nerves, muscles, etc. Secondly, with regard to that which forms the groundwork for the quantitative determination of value, namely the duration of that expenditure or the quantity of labour, it is quite clear that there is a palpable difference between its quantity and quality. In all states of society, the labour time that it costs to produce the means of subsistence must necessarily be an object of interest to mankind, though not of equal interest in different stages of development. Footnote. Among the ancient Germans, the unit for measuring land was what could be harvested in a day, and it was called Tagwerk, Tagvana, Genali or Terra Genalis, or Diurnalis, Mansmad, etc. End footnote. And lastly, from the moment that men in any way work for one another, their labour assumes a social form. Whence, then, arises the enigmatical character of the product of labour, so soon as it assumes the form of commodities? Clearly, from this form itself. The quality of all sorts of human labour is expressed objectively by their products, all being equally values. The measure of the expenditure of labour power by the duration of that expenditure takes the form of the quantity of value of the products of labour. And finally, the mutual relations of the producers, within which the social character of their labour affirms itself, take the form of a social relation between the products. A commodity is therefore a mysterious thing, simply because in it the social character of men's labour appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labour. because the relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labour is presented to them as a social relation, existing not between themselves, but between the products of their labour. This is the reason why the products of labour become commodities, social things whose qualities are at the same time perceptible and imperceptible by the senses. In the same way, the light from an object is perceived by us not as the subjective excitation of our optic nerve, but as the objective form of something outside the eye itself. But in the act of seeing, there is at all events an actual passage of light from one thing to another, from the external object to the eye. There is a physical relation between physical things, but it is different with commodities. There, the existence of things qua commodities and the value relation between the products of labour, which stamps them as commodities, have absolutely no connection with their physical properties and with the material relations arising therefrom. There it is a definite social relation between men that assumes, in their eyes, the fantastic form of a relation between things. In order, therefore, to find an analogy, we must have recourse to the mist-enveloped regions of the religious world. In that world, the productions of the human brain appear as independent beings endowed with life and entering into relation both with one another and the human race. So it is in the world of commodities with the products of men's hands. This I call the fetishism which attaches itself to the products of labour so soon as they are produced as commodities, and which is therefore inseparable from the production of commodities. This fetishism of commodities has its origin, as the foregoing analysis has already shown, in the peculiar social character of the labour that produces them. As a general rule, articles of utility become commodities only because they are products of the labour of private individuals or groups of individuals who carry on their work independently of each other. The sum total of the labour of all these private individuals forms the aggregate labour of society. Since the producers do not come into social contact with each other until they exchange their products, the specific social character of each producer's labour does not show itself, except in the act of exchange. In other words, the labour of the individual asserts itself as a part of the labour of society, only by means of the relations which the act of exchange establishes directly between the products, and indirectly, through them, between the producers. To the latter, therefore, the relations connecting the labour of one individual with that of the rest appear not as direct social relations between individuals at work, but as what they really are, material relations between persons and social relations between things. It is only by being exchanged that the products of labour acquire as values one uniform social status, distinct from their varied forms of existence as objects of utility. This division of a product into a useful thing and a value becomes practically important only when exchange has acquired such an extension that useful articles are produced for the purpose of being exchanged, and their character as values has therefore to be taken into account beforehand during production. From this moment, the labour of the individual producer acquires socially a twofold character. On the one hand, it must, as a definite useful kind of labour, satisfy a definite social want, and thus hold its place as part and parcel of the collective labour of all, as a branch of the social division of labour that has sprung up spontaneously. On the other hand, it can satisfy the manifold wants of the individual producer himself only insofar as the mutual exchangeability of all kinds of useful private labour is an established social fact, and therefore the private useful labour of each producer ranks on an equality with that of all others. The equalisation of the most different kinds of labour can be the result only of an abstraction from their inequalities, or of reducing them to their common denominator, viz. Expenditure of human labour power, or human labour in the abstract. The twofold social character of the labour of the individual appears to him, when reflected in his brain, only under those forms which are impressed upon that labour in everyday practice by the exchange of products. In this way, the character that his own labour possesses of being socially useful takes the form of the condition that the product must be not only useful, but useful for others, and the social character that his particular labour has of being the equal of all other particular kinds of labour takes the form that all the physically different articles that are the products of labour have one common quality, viz. That of having value. Hence, when we bring the products of our labour into relation with each other as values, it is not because we see in these articles the material receptacles of homogeneous human labour. Quite the contrary. Whenever by an exchange we equate as values our different products, by that very act we also equate as human labour the different kinds of labour expended upon them. We are not aware of this, nevertheless we do it. Footnote. When, therefore, Galiani says value is a relation between persons, la ricchezza è una ragione tra due persone, he ought to have added a relation between persons expressed as a relation between things. End footnote. Value, therefore, does not stalk about with a label describing what it is. It is value, rather, that converts every product into a social hieroglyphic. Later on, we try to decipher the hieroglyphic, to get behind the secret of our own social products. To stamp an object of utility as a value is just as much a social product as language. The recent scientific discovery that the products of labour, so far as they are values, are but material expressions of the human labour spent in their production, marks indeed an epoch in the history of the development of the human race, but by no means dissipates the mist through which the social character of labour appears to us to be an objective character of the products themselves. The fact that, in the particular form of production with which we are dealing, viz. The production of commodities, the specific social character of private labour carried on independently consists in the equality of every kind of that labour, by virtue of its being human labour, which character therefore assumes in the product the form of value. This fact appears to the producers, notwithstanding the discovery above referred to be just as real and final as the fact that after the discovery by science of the component gases of air, the atmosphere itself remained unaltered. What, first of all, practically concerns producers when they make an exchange is the question: how much of some other product they get for their own, in what proportions the products are exchangeable. When these proportions have by custom attained a certain stability, they appear to result from the nature of the products, so that, for instance, 1 ton of iron and 2 ounces of gold appear as naturally to be of equal value as a pound of gold and a pound of iron, in spite of their different physical and chemical qualities, appear to be of equal weight. The character of having value, when once impressed upon products, obtains fixity only by reason of their acting and reacting upon each other as quantities of value. These quantities vary continually, independently of the will, foresight, and action of the producers. To them, their own social action takes the form of the action of objects, which rule the producers instead of being ruled by them. It requires a fully developed production of commodities before, from accumulated experience alone, the scientific conviction springs up that all the different kinds of private labour, which are carried on independently of each other, and yet as spontaneously developed branches of the social division of labour, are continually being reduced to the quantitative proportions in which society requires them. And why? Because in the midst of all the accidental and ever-fluctuating exchange relations between the products, the labour time socially necessary for their production forcibly asserts itself like an overriding law of nature. The law of gravity thus asserts itself when a house falls about our ears. Footnote. What are we to think of a law that asserts itself only by periodical revolutions? It is just nothing but a law of nature, founded on the want of knowledge of those whose action is the subject of it. Friedrich Engels. End footnote. The determination of the magnitude of value by labour time is therefore a secret hidden under the apparent fluctuations in the relative values of commodities. Its discovery, while removing all appearance of mere accidentality from the determination of the magnitude of the values of products, yet in no way alters the mode in which that determination takes place. Man's reflections on the forms of social life, and consequently also his scientific analysis of those forms, takes a course directly opposite to that of their actual historical development. He begins, post festum, with the results of the process of development ready to hand before him. The characters that stamp products as commodities, and whose establishment is a necessary preliminary to the circulation of commodities, have already acquired the stability of natural, self-understood forms of social life, before man seeks to decipher not their historical character, for in his eyes they are immutable, but their meaning. Consequently, it was the analysis of the prices of commodities that alone led to the determination of the magnitude of value, and it was the common expression of all commodities in money that alone led to the establishment of their characters as values. It is, however, just this ultimate money form of the world of commodities that actually conceals, instead of disclosing, the social character of private labour and the social relations between the individual producers. When I state that coats or boots stand in a relation to linen, because it is the universal incarnation of abstract human labour, the absurdity of the statement is self-evident. Nevertheless, when the producers of coats and boots compare those articles with linen, or, what is the same thing, with gold or silver, as the universal equivalent, they express the relation between their own private labour and the collective labour of society in the same absurd form. The categories of bourgeois economy consist of such like forms. They are forms of thought expressing with social validity the conditions and relations of a definite, historically determined mode of production, viz. The production of commodities. The whole mystery of commodities, all the magic and necromancy that surrounds the products of labour, as long as they take the form of commodities, vanishes therefore, so soon as we come to other forms of production. Since Robinson Crusoe's experiences are a favourite theme with political economists, let us take a look at him on his island. Footnote: even Ricardo has his stories a la Robinson. He makes the primitive hunter and the primitive fisher straight away, as owners of commodities, exchange fish and game in the proportion in which labour time is incorporated in these exchange values. On this occasion he commits the anachronism of making these men apply to the calculation, so far as their implements have to be taken into account, the annuity tables in current use on the London Exchange in the year 1817. The parallelograms of Mr. Owen appear to be the only form of society, besides the bourgeois form, with which he was acquainted. Karl Marx, Zur Kritik, etc. End footnote. Moderate though he be, yet some few wants he has to satisfy, and must therefore do a little useful work of various sorts, such as making tools and furniture, taming goats, fishing and hunting. Of his prayers and the like we take no account, since they are a source of pleasure to him, and he looks upon them as so much recreation. In spite of the variety of his work, he knows that his labour, whatever its form, is but the activity of one and the same Robinson, and consequently that it consists of nothing but different modes of human labour. Necessity itself compels him to apportion his time accurately between his different kinds of work. Whether one kind occupies a greater space in his general activity than another depends on the difficulties, greater or less as the case may be, to be overcome in attaining the useful effect aimed at. This our friend Robinson soon learns by experience, and having rescued a watch, ledger, and pen and ink from the wreck, commences like a true-born Briton to keep a set of books. His stock book contains a list of the objects of utility that belong to him, of the operations necessary for their production, and lastly, of the labour time the definite quantities of those objects have, on average, cost him. All the relations between Robinson and the objects that form this wealth of his own creation are here so simple and clear as to be intelligible without exertion, even to Mr. Sedley Taylor. And yet those relations contain all that is essential to the determination of value. Let us now transport ourselves from Robinson's Island, bathed in light, to the European Middle Ages, shrouded in darkness. Here, instead of the independent man, we find everyone dependent, serfs and lords, vassals and suzerains, laymen and clergy. Personal dependent here characterises the social relations of production just as much as the other spheres of life organised on the basis of that production.
There'll be enough for you,
For
Carl.
the very reason that personal dependence forms the groundwork of society, there is no necessity for labour and its products to assume a fantastic form different from their reality.
But you gotta
They take the shape in the transitions of society as services in kind and payments in kind. Here, the particular and natural.
All right, thank you very much, Karl Marx, everybody. Now's the part of the show where I do my banishing ritual. Spirit be gone! Back to hell with ye, till I call thee forth again. Okay, ladies and gents, now we're going to be fast forwarding things here a little bit to contemporary modern day America. And we're going to go over some contemporary management tips and strategies for competitive advantage. Oh, shoot. Okay, I guess, all right. Forgot. Okay, we're going to go back to Karl Marx for a second here.
Form of labour, and not, as in a society based on production of commodities, its general abstract form, is the immediate form of social labour. Compulsory labour is just as properly measured time as commodity-producing labour, but every serf knows that what he expends in the service of his lord is a definite quantity of his own personal labour power. The tithe to be rendered to the priest is more a matter of fact than his blessing. No matter then what we may think of the parts played by the different classes of people themselves in this society, the social relations between individuals in the performance of their labour appear at all events as their own mutual personal relations, and are not disguised under the shape of social relations between the products of labour. For an example of labour in common, or directly associated labour, we have no occasion to go back to that spontaneously developed form which we find on the threshold of the history of all civilized races. Footnote, quote, a ridiculous presumption has utterly got abroad that common property in its primitive form is specifically a Slavonian or even exclusively Russian form. It is the primitive form that we can prove to have existed amongst Romans, Teutons and Celts, and even to this day we find numerous examples, ruins though they may be, in India. A more exhaustive study of Asiatic and especially Indian forms of common property would show how, from the different forms of primitive property, different forms of its dissolution have been developed. Thus, for instance, the various original types of Roman and Teutonic private property are deducible from different forms of Indian common property. End quote.
Thank you, Karl. Leadership. Traditional approaches to understanding leadership. 3 traditional approaches to studying leadership are the trait approach, the behavioral approach, and the situational approach. Leader traits. The trait approach is the oldest leadership perspective and was dominant for several decades. This approach seems logical for studying leadership because it focuses on individual leaders and attempts to determine the personal characteristic traits that great leaders share. What set Winston Churchill, Alexander the Great, Gandhi, Napoleon, and Martin Luther King apart from the crowd? The trait approach assumes the existence of a leadership personality and assumes that leaders are born, not made. From 1904 to 1948, over 100 leadership trait studies were conducted. At the end of that period, management scholars concluded that no particular set of traits is necessary for a person to become a successful leader. Enthusiasm for the trait approach diminished, but some research on traits continued. By the mid-1970s, a more balanced view emerged. Although no traits ensure leadership success, certain characteristics are potentially useful. The current perspective is that some personality characteristics, many of which a person need not be born with but can strive to acquire, do distinguish effective leaders from other people. Number one, you got drive. Drive refers to a set of characteristics that reflect a high level of effort. Drive includes high need for achievement, constant striving for improvement, ambition, energy, tenacity, persistence in the face of obstacles, and initiative. In several countries, the achievement needs of top executives have been shown to be related to the growth rates of their organizations. But the need to achieve can be a drawback if leaders focus on personal achievement and get so personally involved with the work that they do not delegate authority and responsibility. And whereas need for achievement has been shown to predict organizational effectiveness in entrepreneurial firms, it does not predict success for division heads in larger and more bureaucratic firms. 2. Leadership motivation. Great leaders not only have drive, they want to lead. They have a high need for power, preferring to be in leadership rather than follower positions. A high power need induces people to attempt to influence others and sustains interest and satisfaction in the process of leadership. When the power need is exercised in moral and socially constructive ways, rather than to the detriment of others, leaders inspire more trust, respect, and commitment to their vision. 3. Integrity. Integrity is the correspondence between actions and words, honesty and credibility. In addition to being desirable characteristics in their own right, are especially important for leaders because these traits inspire trust in others. 4. Self-confidence. Self-confidence is important for a number of reasons. The leadership role is challenging and setbacks are inevitable. Self-confidence allows a leader to overcome obstacles, make decisions despite uncertainty, and instill confidence in others. 5. Knowledge of the business. Effective leaders have a high level of knowledge about their industries, companies, and technical matters. Leaders must have the intelligence to interpret vast quantities of information. Advanced degrees are useful in a career, but ultimately less important than acquired expertise skill that may be the most important. The ability to perceive the needs and goals of others and to adjust one's as the situation warrants. This quality is the cornerstone of the situational approaches to leadership, which we will discuss shortly. All right, going to take another quick break here. Until I get back, though, I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of the Tibetan monks, high in the Himalayan mountains, playing their Tibetan healing sounds. And I am back. Thank you, Tibetan monks. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, caller lines are wide open. You want to call in and be a part of the big show, please feel free. Still got about 47 minutes left. And go ahead and give out that number here. That number to call into the big show is 657-383-1825. 657-383-1825. Give us a call. Be a part of the big shoe. All right, moving on. Okay. So, leader behaviors. The behavioral approach to leadership attempts to identify what good leaders do. Should leaders focus on getting the job done or in keeping their followers happy? Should they make decisions autocratically or democratically? In the behavioral approach, personal characteristics are considered less important than the actual behaviors leaders exhibit. 3 general categories of leadership behavior have received particular attention: behaviors related to task performance, group maintenance, and employee participation in decision making. Task performance. Leadership requires getting the job done. Task performance behaviors are the leader's efforts to ensure that the work unit or organization reaches its goals. This dimension is variously referred to as concern for production, directive leadership, initiating structure, or closeness of supervision. It includes focus on work, quality and accuracy, quantity of output, and following the rules. Group maintenance. In exhibiting group maintenance behaviors, leaders take action to ensure the satisfaction of group members, develop and maintain harmonious work relationships, and preserve the social stability of the group. This dimension is sometimes referred to as concern for people, supportive leadership, or consideration. It includes a focus on people's feelings and comfort, appreciation of them, and stress reduction. One theory of leadership, leader-member exchange, LMX theory, highlights the importance of leader behaviors, not just toward the group as a whole, but toward individuals on a personal basis. The focus is primarily on the leader behaviors historically considered group maintenance. According to LMX theory, and as supported by research evidence, maintenance behaviors such as trust, open communication, mutual respect, mutual obligation, and mutual loyalty form the cornerstone of relationships that are satisfying and perhaps more productive. Remember, though, the potential for cross-cultural differences. Maintenance behaviors are important everywhere, but the specific behaviors can differ from one culture to another. For example, in the United States, maintenance behaviors include dealing with people face-to-face. In Japan, written memos are preferred over giving directions face-to-face, thus avoiding confrontation and permitting face-saving in the events of disagreement. Participation in decision-making. How should a leader make decisions? More specifically, to what extent should leaders involve their people in making decisions? The participation and decision-making dimension of leadership behavior can range from autocratic to democratic. Autocratic leadership makes decisions and then announces them to the group. Democratic leadership solicits input from others. Democratic leadership seeks information, opinions, and preferences, sometimes to the point of meeting with the group, leading discussions, and using consensus or majority vote to make the final choice. The effects of leader behavior. How the leader behaves influences people's attitudes and performance. Studies of these effects focus on autocratic versus democratic decision styles or on performance versus maintenance-oriented behaviors. Decision styles. The classic study comparing autocratic and democratic styles found that a democratic approach resulted in the most positive attitudes, whereas an autocratic approach resulted in somewhat higher performance. A laissez-faire style, in which the leader essentially made no decision, led to more negative attitudes and lower performance. These results seem logical and probably represent the prevalent beliefs among managers about the general effects of these decision-making approaches. Democratic styles, appealing though they may seem, are not always the most appropriate. When speed is of the essence, democratic decision-making may be too slow, or people may demand decisiveness from the leader. Whether a decision should be made autocratically or democratically depends on the characteristics of the leader, the followers, and the situation. Thus, a situational approach to leader decision styles, discussed later in this show, is appropriate. Performance and maintenance behaviors. The performance and maintenance dimensions of leadership are independent of each other. In other words, a leader can behave in ways that emphasize one, both, or neither of these dimensions. Some research indicates that the ideal combination is to engage in both types of leader behaviors. In the well-known Ohio State studies, a team of the Ohio State University researchers investigated the effects of leader behaviors in a truck manufacturing plant of International Harvester. Generally, supervisors who were high on maintenance behaviors, which the researchers termed consideration, had fewer grievances and less turnover in their work units than supervisors who were low on this dimension. The opposite held for task performance behaviors, which the team called initiating structure. Supervisors high on this dimension had more grievances and higher turnover rates. E. Fleischman and E. Harris, patterns of leadership behavior. Anyway. When maintenance and performance leadership behaviors were considered together, the results were more complex. But one conclusion was clear. When a leader must be high on performance-oriented behaviors, he or she should also be maintenance-oriented. Otherwise, the leader will have employees with high rates of turnover and grievances. At about the same time, the Ohio studies were being conducted. An equally famous research program at the University of Michigan was studying the impact of the same leader behaviors on groups' job performance. Among other things, the researchers concluded that the most effective managers engaged in what they called task-oriented behavior, planning, scheduling, coordinating, providing resources, and setting performance goals. Effective managers also exhibited more relationship-oriented behavior, demonstrating trust and confidence, being friendly and considerate, showing appreciation, keeping people informed, and so on. These dimensions of leader behavior are essentially the task performance and group maintenance dimensions. A wide range of effective leadership styles exist. Organizations that understand the need for diverse leadership styles will have a competitive advantage in the modern business environment over those that believe there is only one best way. Situational approaches to leadership. According to proponents of the situational approach to leadership, universally important traits and behaviors do not exist. They believe effective leader behaviors vary from situation to situation. The leaders should first analyze the situation and then decide what to do. In other words, look before you leap. The first situational model of leadership was proposed in 1958 by Tannenbaum and Schmidt in their classic Harvard Business Review article. These authors describe how managers should consider three factors before deciding how to lead: forces in the manager, forces in the subordinate, and forces in the situation. Forces in the subordinate include the employee's knowledge and experience, readiness to assume responsibility for decision-making, interest in the task or problem, and understanding and acceptance of the organization's goals. Forces in the situation include the type of leadership style the organization values, the degree to which the group works effectively as a unit, the problem itself and the type of information needed to solve it, and the amount of time the leader has to make the decision. Path goal theory. Perhaps the most generally useful situational model of leadership effectiveness is path goal theory. Developed by Robert House, path goal gets its name from its concern with how leaders influence followers' perceptions of their work goals and the paths they follow toward goal attainment. The key situational factors in path goal theory are: 1, personal characteristics of followers, and 2, environmental pressures and demands with which followers must cope to attain their work goals. These factors determine which leadership behaviors are most appropriate. The 4 pertinent leadership behaviors are: 1, directive leadership, a form of task performance-oriented behavior. 2, supportive leadership, a form of group maintenance-oriented behavior, participative leadership, or decision style. And 4, achievement-oriented leadership, or behaviors geared toward motivating people, such as setting challenging goals and rewarding good performance. Appropriate leader behaviors, as determined by characteristics of followers and the work environment, lead to effective performance. The theory also specifies which follower and environmental characteristics are important. There are 3 key follower characteristics. Authoritarianism is the degree to which individuals respect, admire, and defer to authority. Locus of control is the extent to which individuals see the environment as responsive to their own behavior. People with an internal focus of control believe that what happens to them is their own doing. People with an external focus of control believe that it is just luck or fate. Finally, abilities is people's belief about their own abilities to do their assigned jobs. Path goal theory states that these personal characteristics determine the appropriateness of various leadership styles. For example, the theory makes the following propositions. A directive leadership style is more appropriate to highly authoritarian people because such people respect authority. A participative leadership style is more appropriate for people who have an internal focus or an internal locus of control because these individuals prefer to have more influence over their own lives. A directive style is more appropriate when subordinates' ability is low. The directive style helps people understand what has to be done. Appropriate leadership style is also determined by 3 important environmental factors: people's tasks, the formal authority system of the organization, and the primary work group. Directive leadership is inappropriate if tasks are well structured. If the task and the authority or rule system are dissatisfying, directive leadership will create greater dissatisfaction. If the task or authority system is dissatisfying, supportive leadership is especially appropriate because it offers one positive source of gratification in an otherwise negative situation. If the primary work group provides social support to its members, supportive leadership is less important. Path goal theory offers many more propositions. In general, the theory suggests that the functions of the leader are to 1. Make the path to work goals easier to travel by providing coaching and direction. 2. Reduce frustrating barriers to goal attainment. And 3. Increase opportunities for personal satisfaction by increasing payoffs to people for achieving personal performance goals. How best to do these things depends on your people and on the work situation. Again, analyze, then adapt your style accordingly. Substitutes for leadership. Sometimes leaders do not have to lead, or situations constrain their ability to lead effectively. The situation may be one in which leadership is unnecessary or has little impact. Substitutes for leadership can provide the same influence on people that leaders otherwise would have. Certain follower, task, and organizational factors are substitutes for task performance-oriented and group maintenance-oriented leader behaviors. For example, group maintenance behaviors are less important and have less impact if people already have a close-knit group. They have a professional orientation. The job is intrinsically satisfying, or there is great physical distance between leader and followers. Physicians who are strongly concerned with professional conduct enjoy their work and work independently, do not need social support from hospital administrators. Task performance leadership is less important and will have less of a positive effect if people have a lot of experience and ability. Feedback is supplied to them directly from the task or by computer, or the rules and procedures are rigid. If these factors are operating, the leader does not have to tell people what to do or how well they are performing. The concept of substitutes for leadership does more than indicate when a leader's attempts at influence will and will not work. It provides useful and practical prescriptions for how to manage more efficiently. If the manager can develop the work situation to the point where a number of these substitutes for leadership are operating, less time will need to be spent in direct attempts to influence people. The leader will be free to spend more time on other important activities. Moving on. Okay, contemporary perspectives on leadership. So far, you have learned of the major classic approaches to understanding leadership. The last couple shows, this is part 3. So now we'll discuss a number of more recent developments that are revolutionizing our understanding of this important aspect of management. These developments include charismatic leadership, transformational leadership, and post-heroic leadership. Charismatic leadership. What is charisma and how does anyone acquire it? Charisma packs an emotional wallop for followers above and beyond ordinary esteem, affection, admiration, and trust. The charismatic is an idolized hero, a messiah, and a savior. Many people value charisma in their leaders, but some people do not like the term charisma. It can be associated with negative charisma of evil leaders whom people follow blindly. Charismatic leaders are dominant and especially self-confident and have a strong conviction in the moral righteousness of their beliefs. They strive to create an aura of competence and success and communicate high expectations for and confidence in followers. The charismatic leader articulates ideological goals and makes sacrifices in pursuit of those goals. The charismatic leader also arouses a sense of excitement and adventure. He or she is an eloquent speaker who exhibits superior verbal skills, which helps communicate the vision and motivate followers. Leaders who possess these characteristics or do these things inspire in their followers trust, confidence, acceptance, obedience, emotional involvement, affection, admiration, and higher performance. Evidence for the positive effects of charismatic leadership has been found in a wide variety of groups, organizations, and management levels, and in countries including India, Singapore, the Netherlands, China, Japan, and Canada. Charisma has been shown to improve corporate financial performance, particularly under conditions of uncertainty. That is, in risky circumstances, when people have difficulty understanding what they should do when environments are changing, uncertainty is stressful and makes organizations more receptive to the ideas and actions of a charismatic leader. Transformational leadership. Charisma contributes to transformational leadership. Transformational leaders get people to transcend their personal interests for the sake of the larger community. They generate excitement and revitalize organizations. The transformational process moves beyond the more traditional transactional approach to leadership. Transactional leaders view management as a series of transactions in which they use their legitimate, reward, and coercive powers to give commands and exchange rewards for services rendered. Unlike transformational leadership, transactional leadership is dispassionate. It does not excite, transform, empower, or inspire people to focus on the interest of the group or organization. However, transactional approaches may be more effective for individualists than for collectivists. Generating excitement. Transformational leaders generate excitement in three primary ways. First, they are charismatic, as described earlier. Second, they give their followers individualized attention. Transformational leaders delegate challenging work to deserving people, keep lines of communication open, and provide one-on-one mentoring to help develop their people. They do not treat everyone alike because not everyone is alike. Third, transformational leaders are intellectually stimulating. They arouse their followers an awareness of problems and potential solutions. They arouse in their followers an awareness of problems and potential solutions. They articulate the organization's opportunity, threats, strengths, and weaknesses. They stir the imagination and generate insight. Therefore, problems are recognized and high-quality solutions are identified and implemented with the full commitment of followers. Skills and strategies. At least 4 skills or strategies contribute to transformational leadership. First, transformational leaders have a vision, a goal, an agenda, or a results orientation that grabs people's attention. Second, they communicate their vision through words, manner, or symbolism. They relate a compelling image of the ultimate goal. Third, transformational leaders build trust by being consistent, dependable, and persistent. They position themselves clearly by choosing a direction and staying with it, thus projecting integrity. Finally, they have a positive self-regard. They are not self-important or complacent. Rather, they recognize their personal strengths, compensate for their weaknesses, nurture and continually develop their talents, and know how to learn from failure. They strive for success rather than merely trying to avoid failure. Post-heroic leadership. A common view of leaders is that they are heroes, phenomenally talented. They step forward in difficult times and save the day. But in these complex times, it is foolhardy to assume that a great top executive can solve all problems by himself or herself. Effective leadership must permeate the organization, not reside in 1 or 2 superstars at the top. The leader's job becomes one of spreading leadership ability throughout the firm. Make people responsible for their own performance. Create an environment in which each person can figure out what needs to be done and then do it well. Make the way and clear the path so that people can succeed. Give them the credit they deserve. Make heroes out of them. Thus, what is now required of leaders is less the efficient management of resources and more the effective unleashing of intellectual capital and human resources. In other words, you should capitalize on all the brains and talent in your organization. Key roles personifying post-heroic leadership in the 21st century include: 1. Using vision to motivate and inspire. It is important that people in an organization have something to be proud of. Employees like to see a purpose that goes beyond numbers. It is important that a company can be perceived as changing the world in a positive way. 2. Empowering employees at all levels. You best lead by serving the needs of your people. You don't do their job for them. You enable them to learn and progress on the job. Most people want to expand their own knowledge, feel involved in their organization, and contribute to its success. 3. Challenging the status quo and enabling creativity. The new competitive landscape is swarming with opportunities that are best addressed via innovation and creativity. Moving on. All right, let's see here. Motivating for performance. The reward of a thing well done is to have done it. Ralph Waldo Emerson. How can a manager motivate people to work hard and perform at their best levels? Motivating for performance. Understanding why people do the things they do on the job is not an easy task for the manager. Predicting their response to management's latest productivity program is harder yet. Fortunately, enough is known about motivation to give the thoughtful manager practical, effective techniques for increasing people's effort and performance. Motivation refers to forces that energize, direct, and sustain a person's efforts. All behavior except involuntary reflexes like eye blinks is motivated. A highly motivated person will work hard toward achieving performance goals. With adequate ability and understanding of the job, such a person will be highly productive. To be effective motivators, managers must know what behaviors they want to motivate people to exhibit. Although productive people appear to do a seemingly limitless number of things, most of the important activities can be grouped into 5 general categories. The company must motivate people to 1. Join the organization, 2. Remain in the organization, and 3. Come to work regularly. On these points, you should reject the common recent notion that loyalty is dead and accept the challenge of creating an environment that will attract and energize people so they commit to the organization. Of course, companies also want people to perform. That is, once employees are at work, they should work hard to achieve high output productivity and high quality. Finally, managers want employees to 5. Exhibit good citizenship. Good citizens of the organization are committed, satisfied employees who perform above and beyond the call of duty by doing extra things that can help the company. The importance of citizenship behaviors may be less obvious than productivity, but these behaviors help the organization function smoothly. They also make managers' lives easier. Many ideas have been proposed to help managers motivate people to engage in these constructive behaviors. The most useful of these ideas are described in the following parts of this analysis. We start with the most fundamental processes that influence the motivation of all people. These processes, described by goal-setting, reinforcements, and expectancy theories, suggest basic and powerful actions for managers to take. Then we discuss the content of what people want and need from work, how individuals differ from one another, and how understanding people's needs leads to powerful prescriptions about designing motivating jobs and empowering people to perform at the highest possible levels. Finally, we discuss the most important beliefs and perceptions about fairness that people hold toward work and the implications for managers. Setting goals. Providing work-related goals for people is an extremely effective way to stimulate motivation. In fact, it is perhaps the most important, valid, and useful single approach to motivating performance. Therefore, we discuss it first. Goal-setting theory states that people have conscious goals that energize them and direct their thoughts and behaviors toward a particular end. With the principle that goals matter in mind, managers set goals for employees. For example, a cable TV company might set goals for increasing the number of new subscribers, or the number of current subscribers who pay for premium channels, or the timeliness of responses to customer inquiries. Goals that motivate. What kinds of goals most effectively motivate people? How can managers set motivating goals for the people who report to them? First, goals should be acceptable to employees. This means, among other things, that they should not conflict with people's personal values and that people have reasons to pursue the goals. Allowing people to participate in setting their work goals, as opposed to having the boss set goals for them, is often a great way to generate goals that people accept and pursue willingly. Second, acceptable, maximally motivating goals are challenging but attainable. In other words, they should be high enough to inspire better performance, but not so high that people can never reach them. Third, goals should be specific, quantifiable, and measurable. Limitations of goal setting. Goal setting is an extraordinarily powerful management technique. But like anything else, even specific, challenging, attainable goals work better under some conditions than others. Individual performance goals can be dysfunctional if people work in a group and cooperation among team members is central to team performance. Individualized goals can create competition and reduce cooperation. If cooperation is important, performance goals should be established for the team. It is important not to establish a single productivity goal if there are other important dimensions of performance. For instance, productivity goals will likely enhance productivity, but they may also cause employees to neglect other things like tackling new projects or developing creative solutions to job-related problems. The manager who wants to motivate creativity should establish creativity goals along with productivity goals. Moving on. Reinforcing performance. Goals are universal motivators. So are the processes of reinforcement described in this section. In 1911, psychologist Edward Thorndike formulated the law of effect. Behavior that is followed by positive consequences probably will be repeated. This powerful law of behavior laid the foundation for countless investigations into the effects of the positive consequences called reinforcers that motivate behavior. Organizational behavior modification attempts to influence people's behavior and improve performance by systematically managing work conditions and the consequences of people's actions. Okay, so 4 key consequences of behavior either encourage or discourage people's behavior. 1, positive reinforcement. Applying a consequence that increases the likelihood that the person will repeat the behavior that led to it. Examples of positive reinforcers include compliments, letters of recommendation, favorable performance evaluations, and pay raises. It is important to remember that feedback and social reinforcers lead, including recognition for a job well done, are powerful, or can be as powerful as monetary reinforcers. 2, you got negative reinforcement, removing or withholding an undesirable consequence. For example, a manager takes an employee or a school takes a student off probation because of improper performance. Okay. 3, punishment, administering an aversive consequence. Examples include criticizing or shouting at an employee, assigning an unappealing task, and sending a worker home without pay. Negative reinforcement can involve the threat of punishment, but not delivering it when employees perform satisfactorily. Punishment is the actual delivery of the aversive consequence. Managers use punishment when they think it is warranted or when they believe others expect them to, and they usually concern themselves with following company policy and procedure. 4, extinction, withdrawing or failing to provide a reinforcement consequence. When this occurs, motivation is reduced and the behavior is extinguished or eliminated. Examples include not giving a compliment for a job well done, forgetting to say thanks for a favor, and setting impossible performance goals so that the person never experiences a success. The first two consequences, positive and negative reinforcement, are positive for the person receiving them. The person either gains something or avoids something negative. Therefore, the person who experiences these consequences will be motivated to behave in the ways that led to the reinforcements. The last two consequences, punishment and extinction, are negative outcomes for the person receiving them. Motivation to repeat the behavior that led to the desirable results will be reduced. Sometimes organizations and managers reinforce the wrong behaviors. Whereas executive stock options were intended to motivate executives to care more about the company's stock price, they have motivated executives to engage in inappropriate behaviors to manipulate the stock price rather than create real value. The company that bases performance reviews on short-term results is reinforcing a short-run perspective in decision-making. At the same time, it is discouraging behaviors that will pay off in the long run. Managers must identify which kinds of behaviors they reinforce and which they discourage. The reward system has to support the firm's strategic intent, defining performance in terms of the pursuit of strategic objectives. Reward employees for developing themselves in strategically important ways, for building new skills that are critical to strengthening core competencies and creating value. Managers should be creative in their use of reinforcers. Innovative managers use non-monetary rewards, including intellectual challenge, greater responsibility, autonomy, recognition, flexible benefits, and greater influence over decisions. These and other rewards for high-performance employees, when creatively devised and applied, can continue to motivate when pay and promotions are scarce. All right, going to take a very quick break here. Before I wrap up the show, let you know what we got on tap for next show. Okay, performance-related beliefs. Reinforcement theory describes processes by which factors in the work environment affect people's behavior. This is where we're going to pick it up during next week's show. I'm getting to the point now where I guess I didn't really plan it this way, but it looks like I'm doing anywhere from 1 to 3 shows nowadays. So I'm usually either focusing on my management tips and strategies, business-related topics, or I'm doing the roundtable discussions. The political roundtable discussions. But I've been averaging about 1 to 3 shows a week lately. It seems to be all I have time for. So I probably won't get back to this again until next week. But we're going to pick up this discussion on leadership and talking about performance-related beliefs. Just as a little teaser, just to let you know what's coming up. Here we go. Reinforcement theory describes processes by which factors in the work environment affect people's behavior. Expectancy theory adds to that some of the cognitive processes that go in people's heads. Adds to that. Okay. So, according to expectancy theory, the person's work efforts lead to some level of performance. then performance results in one or more outcomes for the person. People develop two important beliefs linking these three events: expectancy, which links effort to performance, and instrumentality, which links performance to outcomes. Okay, so the effort to performance link. The first belief, expectancy, is people's perceived likelihood that their efforts will enable them to attain their performance goals. And expectancy can be high, up to 100%, such as when a student is confident that if she studies hard, she can get a good grade on the final. And expectancy can also be low, down to 0% likelihood, such as when a suitor is convinced that his dream date will never go out with him. All else equal, high expectancies create higher motivation than do low expectancies. In the preceding examples, the student is more likely to study for the exam than the suitor is to pursue the dream date.
90 seconds.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the big show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Like I said, next show, I have another seance. We're going to bring Karl Marx's spirit on, and he's going to talk about Das Kapital. And we're going to talk more about leadership tips and strategies for competitive advantage. And until then, everybody, don't take any wooden nickels.